Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome to the 81st audio file in the audiocast series known as the Q News Patriot. I am the Q News Patriot. My name is SG Anon. Your patience with this file's release is well appreciated. I was attempting to get a near final version done on the 15th of September when the events of that day took place. And upon observing that, I felt it necessary to step back and to reevaluate and to reassess the irregular warfare landscape, continuity of government, and holistic angles of the worldwide arena that are informing the political and military situation happening here in the American homeland. We have a long file today and not a lot of time to break a great deal of this down, Patriots. I'm excited to share the information that I've aggregated with each of you. So without further ado, let's get right to it. With respect to victories on the patriotic front, I thought we would start our file with a little bit of a pick-me-up. These headlines coming out of the Department of Homeland Security Investigations Division. We know that DHS is heavily involved in the interdiction of organized sex trafficking, human trafficking, and sexual enslavement cells worldwide, and that they've been granted extreme, or maybe that's not the best way to say it, additional, expanded is the best word to use for it, authorities to do so in a cooperative international scope under the continuity of government and various national emergencies. These headlines, all of them coming from just the last 6 days. HSI Denver investigation results in significant sentence for man charged with producing child sexual abuse material. A Colorado man pleaded guilty to attempted production of child pornography September 11th and was sentenced to 29 years in prison and a lifetime of supervised release. South Texas man receives max sentence for smuggling more than 100 non-citizens. A South Texas man received the maximum sentence allowed under U.S. law for illegally transporting unlawful present non-citizens following an investigation by Homeland Security, the U.S. Border Patrol, and the Texas Department of Public Safety. Former California teacher sentenced for child exploitation after HSI investigation. The person in a position of trust installed hidden cameras in the bathrooms of the school. A former high school teacher was sentenced to more than 17 years in prison, followed by a lifetime of supervised release for child exploitation offenses. Sean Diddy Combs charged in Manhattan federal court with sex trafficking, additional federal offenses following HSI New York investigation. Alleged conduct occurred over more than a decade in multiple states. HSI New York Special Agent in Charge William Walker and Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, doesn't Q tell us to trust SDNY, announced that Sean Combs, aka Puff Daddy, aka P. Diddy, aka PD, aka Love, was arrested and charged in a 3-count indictment with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. Another headline, 2 Rhode Island men charged for leading roles in large-scale organized theft crime ring after HSI and USPIS investigation. Theft ring estimated to have netted $12.3 million. An investigation led by HSI New England and the U.S. Postal Inspection Service led to the arrest of 2 Rhode Island men described in court documents as high-level members of an organized retail theft crime ring. HSI Newark investigation results in sentence for New Jersey man who possessed and distributed child sexual abuse material. HSI Newark resulted in the sentencing of a Morris County man to 84 months in prison for possessing and distributing images of child sexual abuse. Massachusetts man indicted for smuggling and conspiracy to commit export control violations involving Russian nuclear energy. 2 men, one from Massachusetts, face charges for allegedly smuggling and conspiring to violate and evade export controls relating to the sale of laser equipment to the Russian nuclear energy industry after their conspiracy was uncovered by HSI special agents and law enforcement partners. So that's very interesting because lasers would certainly be one way to interfere with the integrity and the temperature maintenance functionality of a nuclear reactor. And we know that there's several nuclear power plants in the Ukrainian countryside and in the southwestern portion of the Russian countryside. I say several, I think there's 2 or 3 that are in that arena that could be contenders for a potential radioactive false flag. HSI Newark investigation leads to former Bronx attorney's guilty plea in large-scale immigration fraud. Following an investigation led by HSI Newark, a Bronx, New York-based former immigration attorney pleaded guilty to charges in a large-scale immigration fraud scheme. South Texas man who attempted to import meth in shoebox sentenced following HSI RGV federal partner investigation. A South Texas man was sentenced for importing crystal meth in a shoebox following an investigation by HSI and U.S. Customs and Border Patrol. Man charged with trafficking a woman for sex after HSI New England investigation. A man has been charged after an investigation led by Homeland Security New England found he allegedly trafficked a woman to engage in commercial sex acts, coerced her to travel across state lines, forced her to assist him in robbing multiple convenience stores, and forced her to assist in procuring an illegal firearm for him to use in one of those robberies. Another headline, South Texas man sentenced to 38 years for gunpoint extortion of migrants following HSI RGV federal partner investigation. A South Texas man was sentenced on multiple counts of hostage taking, human smuggling, and weapons charges following an investigation conducted by HSI with the assistance from the U.S. Border Patrol, the U.S. Marshals, the ATF, and the Hidalgo County Sheriff. Florida man pleads guilty to attempting to entice a minor to engage in sexual activity. A Florida man has pled guilty as a result of a joint Homeland Security Orlando investigation for attempting to entice a minor to engage in sexual activity. HSI New Orleans prepares for 2025 Super Bowl by hosting a human trafficking awareness workshop. Homeland Security New Orleans, the Department of Homeland Security Center for Countering Human Trafficking and the Blue Campaign conducted a 3-day human trafficking training workshop at, and here it is, Patriots, at the Hyatt Regency in New Orleans, who is associated with Hyatt and also on the Epstein list. I'll just leave that out there for everyone. We're sticking it in their face. Another headline, Philadelphia man admits to enticing minor following HSI Newark investigation. A Philadelphia man admitted to using an internet-based chat app to entice a minor to engage in prostitution following an investigation conducted by HSI Newark. Now remember, Patriots, all of these headlines are in the last 6 days. 6 days. Knoxville woman sentenced to more than 8 years in murder for hire plot. Now this is an important one, and I've chosen to end last with this one for a reason. A Knoxville woman was sentenced to more than 8 years for using interstate commerce facilities in the commission of a murder for hire conspiracy following a Homeland Security investigations, Knoxville and HSI Birmingham, Alabama. I'm going to read the entirety of this press release. So-and-so, 48, of Knoxville was sentenced to 100 months in federal prison and will be on supervised release for 3 years after. So-and-so was also ordered to pay $5,389 in restitution to the victim of this case. According to filed court documents, so-and-so admitted to using a dark web hosted site known as the Online Killers Market for the purpose of hiring a hitman to murder an Alabama resident. Now we're going to pause there. I'm going to come back to reading the rest of this, and I'm going to say something that's important to remember. Most of the hitmen in the Western world come out of Moldova, Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, and southwestern Russia and the Caucasus nations. So you're including Georgia with that. I think in some regards you may even get as far over as Kazakhstan, but certainly those other nations that I just named. In her communications with the site, so-and-so provided photographs and location information of the victim. So-and-so also requested that the killing appear to, quote, seem random or accident, or plant drugs, do not want a long investigation, end quote. In exchange for the anticipated murder of the victim, so-and-so used the internet to transmit nearly $10,000 in cryptocurrency to the would-be assassins. Now, why did FTX tie back to Ukraine? I'm going to leave that out there, and I'm going to let this press release sort of connect those dots for each of you. Ultimately, the plan was unsuccessful. So-and-so was arrested and her home searched. At the house, law enforcement uncovered a journal listing out several other hitman websites, a handwritten account of communications with the Online Killers Market, and a stack of U.S. currency underneath a sticky note having a Bitcoin address. The Knoxville Police Department and the Prattville Police Department in Alabama assisted in the investigation. Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Tennessee, Anne Marie Svolto, prosecuted the case. So this is important because we have an event that just occurred the other day here in the United States on the 15th of September that very quickly was tied back to Ukraine. That event, of course, was the attempted assassination of President Donald Trump. And we're going to talk a little bit about that and that particular event and why I believe that that's going to lead us directly back to Hussein Obama and the lovely Hillary Rodham Clinton. For a moment, I have to share my screen with each of you because we're going to start our discussion on this topic with a screen share and a decode. All right. So if you look at the screen before you, you will see Donald Trump's TruthSocial post on September the 15th at 10:44 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. My computer is permanently frozen on Central Time. And the post reads, "I hate Taylor Swift!" exclamation point. Now, 1044, I found very interesting because it contains the number 44. And we know that Hussein was the 44th president. We also know 10 Days of Darkness, but I didn't want to include that in a serious capacity for the decode, but I think it's an interesting sidebar. Post 1044, drop 1044, from April the 6th, 2018, at a Skull and Bones time frame, 3:22 and 28, pics will surface of Hussein holding AK-47 in tribal attire. Obama, the weapon of the attempted assassination, tribal attire denoting a reference to terrorism or terrorist activities. One of many, net shutdown. And the drop is then shared by Q and recommented. Fake pic push by mainstream media, videos and backup. Google kill, YouTube kill, FB kill, Twitter kill, Yahoo kill, Bing kill, Instagram kill. Net will be paused. Hammer. You could also interpret that as a gavel or justice on the clock, meaning we're at work and we're moving quickly. So then understanding that we have a huge throw here and an interesting response discussed here as to the time frame of this assassination and certainly a reference to Hussein and the AK-47. The component that fascinated me about this was the reference to Taylor Swift. So if we come over here to Taylor Swift's music label, her record label, we find that as Universal Music Group, the same group that owns Universal Studios, or associated with the same holding group that holds Universal Studios. This group, Universal Music Group, has just recently lost 24% of its overall share price, which is huge. The largest mutual fund and institutional fund holders inside this group are hedge funds coming directly out of Wall Street. And of these top mutual fund holders, we have iShares, Fidelity, Sequoia, Vanguard, Euro Pacific, Fidelity, Artisan, and a variable insurance product fund, and a world growth and income fund. What I found very interesting is that we had the conflation of Vanguard, Sequoia, and Fidelity all on here, but iShares caught my attention because I thought that I had heard that name before, and indeed I had. iShares is a collection of exchange-traded funds managed by BlackRock, which acquired the brand of business from Barclays in 2009. The first iShares ETFs were known as World Equity Benchmark Shares, but have since been rebranded. Now, the reason I think that this is also going to include Hillary Clinton and come back to Ukraine and BlackRock is fundamentally because we've got the individual now from the ground that day, later captured. I think his name is Ruth or Roth, Routh. This individual shows up in a commercial produced for the recruitment to the Ukrainian Nazi armed services. That commercial had to have been produced by someone that had cinematic interest in that cause. We know that BlackRock has shown up in the Ukrainian cause in a cinematic way a couple of different times, actually, and is certainly heavily involved in buying the land over there. It's also very interesting that BlackRock produced the educational commercial, which the first assassin on 7/13 was known to have appeared in. And the reason I think this is also going to come back to Clinton is because not only do we have the association with Clinton and BlackRock itself, and that's apparent right here. Cheryl Mills sits on the board of directors of BlackRock and was one of Clinton's closest presidential campaign advisors in 2016. But fundamentally, we also have the Hillary Clinton Clinton Foundation and that whole Clinton crime syndicate association with the Ukraine through the operations of this quote unquote humanitarian mission that was undertaken by that foundation publicly with announcements that were put out in the press. I think it was about a year and a half ago at this point, maybe just a little bit over. So looking then back to President Trump's TruthSocial post here, I hate Taylor Swift. I think this was a massive communication to let us know that this is going back to Hussein Obama. This is going back to Ukraine. This is going back to the same globalist finance interests that control all of our entertainment, our media. With the ABC presidential debate that we saw just a few days prior to this on the 10th, we saw what appeared to be active military disembarking from Trump Force One, immediately prior to that debate. We know that ABC News is just another example, or excuse me, just another extension of that large news complex that's been controlled by these same hedge funds and Disney and others, for a long time. So fundamentally, I think who's ultimately responsible, I think President Trump told us here, at least in this assassination attempt from the 15th of September, that the people ultimately responsible will tie back to and be fleshed out and exposed as being individuals associated with the 44th president of the United States and the Clinton crime syndicate. Now, all of that being said, that's sort of a huge thing to take in, because we've got the very staunch reality being presented in a number of different ways that Clinton is somehow going to work herself back into this race. Now, I've said many times on this particular program that Clinton 1.0 is gone. I maintain that assessment, but I'd also like to point out for everyone that legacy destruction has to be a multi-fold longitudinal process. And I think in many respects, between both the very real potential of clones out there, as well as doubles that have been used out there as security decoys for decades, we have the ability to create a very lasting impression on humankind and destroy and mar these reputations for immortality. And that, I believe, is exactly what's going on here. And so when we look at the Clinton connection and the Clinton exposure in a great deal of this, and we also look at the fact that Clinton seems to be trying to come back into the race, I think it's increasingly more likely that we start seeing whistleblowers coming out of the Democrat camp, coming out of the perhaps even directly out of the DNC, saying that they're being pressured or threatened by this group of individuals. And it would not surprise me whatsoever if we saw a Russian formal accusation of impropriety and misconduct by either the Clintons or the Hussein Obama 44th administration based on the activities, the child trafficking and the kidnapping operations that are being run on the ground in Ukraine with the assistance of the Kiev government, the Zelensky regime, etc. It's very interesting that the Russians are beginning to come back into the narrative on both sides, because it has, of course, been the Russians that have ancestrally stood up against for at least the last 1,000 years. They're the main power that has stood up and resisted against this particular form of occultic behavior, and certainly this lens of operation here in the world. Russia began this campaign to reclaim the Ukrainian countryside actively in 2022. The war itself began, very long ago. And we know that fundamentally, while it has the political effect of changing over the public control and certainly restoring the ability of the people within the Ukrainian countryside to have a referendum on what level of sovereignty and independence they would like to have, it also provides the backdrop and the basis needed to destroy catacomb and trafficking systems, to destroy the intelligence community infestation that has taken up the entirety of that countryside since immediately following the Second World War, and to destroy and expose U.S. biological terrorism at the hands of the DNC, at the hands of the 44th administration, certainly at the hands of the overall NATO biological terrorism complex that has existed in the military forces in the background, unfortunately, for a long time. That comes back to that highlighting of patriots and traitors in our militaries that we talk fairly frequently about on this particular program. So with that said, the Russians are moving into Odessa, and they're going to be moving in there very quickly. We've got the strategic misdirection and the sort of extraction and drawing out of the Ukrainian reserves and tying down of the Ukrainian military and the NATO reinforcements that they have there on the ground in the Kursk region, with the fronts that Russia opened with Volchansk and into the Kharkov region, advancing forward in those areas. And fundamentally, I believe all of this to be serving the broader perspective to move pieces around on the geography of the Ukraine and get them as far away from Odessa as possible, so that a blitzkrieg campaign, if I can utilize the term, or a lightning campaign into Odessa by Russia to set up territorial control and repel attempts at recapture, I think that that's absolutely coming, and it's coming soon. And with that, I think we're going to see significant advancement in the underground war and in the destruction of these tunnels and catacomb systems beneath the Ukrainian countryside, because Odessa sits at the junction node of one of the largest, actually it's the largest, tunnel and catacomb system in the entirety of the southeastern European shelf, and right there into the Caucasus region as well. These tunnels extend beneath the western component part of the Black Sea. They extend westward into Europe, northward into the Ukraine, and then even from there into Belarus and up to the Baltic Sea through the Baltic states, and certainly to the east over to the Caucasus and down into what's sort of that ancestral homeland for some of these dark occultists. I say ancestral over the last 2,000 years, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea to the northeast of Turkey. I'm trying to paint that geography out there for everyone so that they understand the broadness, and so that we can appreciate why these junctions have to move in tandem. The Baltic states and Odessa are likely to spawn off and ignite around the same time, because some of those Odessa catacombs are very direct routes beneath the Ukrainian countryside all of the way up into the Baltic states. And there's a great deal of movement of we'll just call it dark criminality material in these areas of the world. So the Russians preparing to move into that area, it's likely we see a NATO false flag blamed on Russia, of course, with Poland and the Baltic states. The Poles have a lot to lose with this. I say the Poles, the Polish deep state component infiltration, let's put it that way, has a lot to lose with this. The same with the Baltic stooges that are just doing the bidding of the American Western State Department and military machine. And so we're seeing the preparation, I think, from the military alliance in the irregular warfare landscape to assist Russia with exactly this pattern of behavior and exactly these goals and aims. If we come over here, a headline that came out, looks like just today: flooding in Central Europe blamed for 24 deaths as EU promises 11 billion in emergency repair funding. Taken from Warsaw, Poland, European Union Chief Ursula von der Leyen on Thursday pledged billions of euros in aid for Central European countries that suffered enormous damage to infrastructure and housing during the massive flooding that has so far claimed 24 lives in the region. So we know that damaging infrastructure inhibits the military-industrial machine. It also inhibits the industrial base of rapid response in case things get a little hairy a little quickly. In the situation that's playing out in the world, while it sounds sort of oxymoronic to say this, or sort of what's the word? Paradoxical to say this, that's actually a good thing from our end. And some of these countries included Poland, Austria, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia. For those out there that are sort of geography nuts, several of the affected countries border the Ukraine directly. The ones that don't border directly are bordered by these others that were just listed. So it's all in the same area of the world. And it didn't take very long to quickly establish that all of those respective countries have enormous underground tunnel systems. Taken from the Miami Herald: secret tunnel with key purpose uncovered beneath palace ruins in Poland. And this was just from August of last year. In the center of Poland's largest city, an underground structure went undetected for almost a century. Archaeologists excavating the ruins of Saxon Palace in Warsaw uncovered a secret tunnel. According to an August 16th news release, the tunnel appeared on no known blueprints of the palace. If we come over here, another example of Polish tunnels. Did Nazis hide loot beneath this giant Polish castle? This taken from the Smithsonian. Kasaz Castle in southern Poland sits atop a remarkable complex of underground tunnels built by the Nazis in 1944. Some experts believe these tunnels hold a still undiscovered secret, but what? And then it offers us a video option there. Reese, the underground city of the Third Reich, also beneath Poland. Let me see here. The Reese Project, translated from German as giant, is simply the code name for the Nazis' largest mining and construction project. It's worth remembering that mining often shows up intersecting with human smuggling and the kidnapping of human beings for ritual, occultic sacrifice and abuse. Let me see here. According to Jonas Vitgold Galkowitz, professor at the University of Wrocław, The Soe Mountains are in a very special way connected with the culture of the Celts. Fascinating. Another article taken from the Miami Herald, this one referencing Slovakia, 200-year-old tunnels found under Slovakian city. Under a picturesque city in Slovakia ran a centuries-old network of crumbling tunnels. The once life-saving passageways had fallen into disrepair. We come over here, another one. Revolutionaries find labyrinth beneath Bucharest. That's Romania, which is directly bordered by Moldova. Romanian revolutionary soldiers found a vast labyrinth of safe houses and tunnels used by police forces loyal to Nicolae Ceausescu. I think that's how I pronounce that. I apologize if I butchered it. Some with secret entries in cemetery burial vaults and to the subway system. So if you're talking about snatching someone literally right off the sidewalk, this is how you do it. Army officers speaking on Bucharest radio Sunday said the sprawling maze of tunnels crisscrosses the city and links two airports. Army units siding with pro-reform protesters have been battling the secret police for control of the country. The highly trained and heavily armed security forces have been making hit-and-run guerrilla attacks. Now, this news blurb came out of December of 1989, actually released on Christmas Day, which is another symbolically important day for these discussions. And then an article taken from February of 2023, underground labyrinth with secret passages and tunnels in the Dobrogea Plateau in Romania. So fundamentally, the reason for a great deal of what we're seeing coming out of Russia, a great deal for what we have seen with this ongoing formation of a public-facing Russian-led military coalition in Europe and a private covert special operations military coalition assisting that coalition on the Western side. The main reason that it has been done in this fashion and why it's proceeding in this way is to accomplish things like what I'm about to read to you. This taken just from yesterday, the 19th of September. An ex-CIA officer gets 30 years in prison for drugging, filming, and assaulting dozens of women. Former CIA officer has been sentenced to 30 years for drugging, sexually assaulting, and filming more than 24 women across multiple countries for more than a decade. So understanding then that the playgrounds like the Ukraine, like Eastern Europe, all of these different arenas, they play host to a great deal of this corruption, and they play host to a great deal of the facilitating infrastructure that enables the type of corruption that results in assassination attempts and cryptocurrency money laundering and dark money pool participation and things of that nature. We're taking that component out with these aligned military objectives and these military missions, but it has to be done in a way that sidelines those opponents that have in the middle that have been in control for so long, and indeed in some areas still leverage parts of the game board against us rather than for us. Now, one of the parts of the game board that is being leveraged for us in a major, very significantly important way, and I think statistically significant way is maybe even a better way to say it, is with what President Trump told us just the other day. He said at his rally in New York at Uniondale. Let me see here. It looks like this was a couple of days ago. This rally speech, he made the commentary that he was going to Springfield and that he was going to Aurora and that we may never see him again. And while patriots out there immediately became worried and concerned, I think this is President Trump actually telling us more about the financial world than anything else. And we know that those events are going to cause an unprecedented chain sequence of events to happen here domestically in the United States that will result in, I think, activation of EO 13224 and the apprehension of anti-terrorism operations. In other words, a true lawful return to authority and power of we the people, government of the people, by the people, and for the people, but walking through the burning doorway in order to get there. But at the same time, we have the pin in our pocket, if we want to call it that by walking through that burning doorway, we're shifting over the financial landscape in a fashion that they will never be able to take back and leverage against us ever again. So in many regards, it's existential for their type of corruption and the way that they have always leveraged control. So I'm going to share the screen here with each of you. I want you to see the statements coming from President Trump at that rally, referencing his adventure to Springfield and to Aurora. Give me just a moment here. Here we go.
Thank you. We have no choice. We have no choice. It's not like, You know, this is not sustainable by any country. This is not sustainable. How about in Springfield, Ohio? They had 32,000. This is a little beautiful town. No crime, no problem. 32,000 illegal immigrants come into the town, 32. So they almost doubled their population in a period of a few weeks. Can you believe it? And you know what? They've got to get much tougher. I'm going to go there in the next 2 weeks. I'm going to Springfield and I'm going to Aurora. You may never see me again, but that's okay. Got to do what I got to do.
I got to do what I got to do. So with respect to bankrupting an entity, sometimes the attitude can be applied as I have to do what I have to do in order to salvage the whole of whatever the mission may be. And with reference specifically to both Springfield and Aurora, at the same time talking about how we've got, 32,000, and he continues to harp on the number 32 for a couple of different sort of repetitive emphases there. I wanted to highlight a couple of different things and begin this decode with exactly that. So let me pull up Q drop 32. Q drop 32 reads, maybe one day, but it cannot go slow. This also contains 44 in the timestamp, 2:44 and 10 seconds. 10:44. Oh my, there's another connection right there on Anons. I hadn't done that decode prior. Maybe one day, but it cannot go slow. The initial wave will be fast and meaningful. It will send a signal to others immediately, and you'll see the tide turn. Not even the mainstream media can hide, and rest assured, some will be jailed as deep cover agents. So understanding then that we're talking about, reconciling some amount of beginning unrest. That's the flavor of that drop. That's the sort of the imprintation, if you will, that I take away from that. I thought it very fascinating that he mentioned Aurora, because Aurora is also the name of a Bank of International Settlements anti-money laundering project that was initially begun under negative auspices, but I believe has been repurposed for the ability to essentially repurposed for the goal, it's what I'm trying to say, to eliminate terrorism and the ability to finance terrorism. So let me read a brief summary of Project Aurora to each of you. From 31 May of last year, 2023, money laundering is a global problem that undermines the integrity and safety of the global financial system. The amount of money laundered globally is estimated to be between 2 and 5% of all global GDP, or between $2 and $5 trillion. However, the estimated total sum seized annually amounts to less than 1% of that estimate. Compliance costs for financial institutions are also rising, driven by anti-money laundering regulations and the evolving criminal threat landscape. Now, coming down here, Project Aurora is a proof of concept that explores the use of privacy-enhancing technologies, machine learning and network analysis, and collaborative analysis and learning approaches for detecting money laundering activities. It involves 3 parts: generating a synthetic data set that represents transactions within and across borders with embedded patterns of money laundering activities. The data set contains a minimum set of data points. Testing of different monitoring scenarios, siloed, national, and cross-border, with machine learning models. Testing the application of privacy-enhancing technologies on the data set with machine learning and network analysis to support privacy, data protection, and information security in different collaborative analysis and learning approaches. Project Aurora demonstrates the advantages and potential of using payments data in combination with privacy-enhancing technologies, machine learning models, and network analysis for the detection of complex money laundering schemes. The project also simulates how these data and technologies could be brought together to enable public-private collaborative analysis arrangements, both nationally and internationally, to counter money laundering. Now, that's very interesting because on the 1st of October, Anons and Patriots, the guidelines from Basel III go into full implementation here in the U.S. legal landscape. And just on the 17th of September, we saw the Justice Department withdraw from the 1995 bank merger guidelines, which essentially allowed for the big banks and Wall Street to administratively legislate or perhaps bureaucratically administrate, is a better way to say it, their way out of being punished for violation of antitrust laws. And the new 2023 merger guidelines are 5 times the length of the 1995 guidelines and include, let me see here, and include 11 blanket statements. In other words, 11 governing umbrellas of conditions wherein bank mergers would violate U.S. trust laws under the Sherman Act and under the Clayton Act. So the fact that we are literally moving into a period where we're going to require them to have capital that we know none of them have because they've been money laundering it all over the planet and they've been stealing it from all of us and fleecing it from all of us in ways that are inappropriate. And then they've been taking out derivatives in the hundreds of trillions against markets to suppress those markets. We know that none of these institutions are going to be able to meet these requirements on their face, and a liquidity crisis is going to brew. And these new merger guidelines will not let them get out of violation of U.S. antitrust law. There is nowhere to go. They have to merge into a monopoly that violates U.S. trust law just to try and hold the Hydra up. That puts them squarely in the target of patriots inside the Department of Justice that we know have been working in conjunction with other financial investigations with the U.S. Virgin Islands and with other arenas of criminality going back, a number of years really at this point. So this is absolutely amazing, and I think what President Trump is referencing with Aurora specifically is the implementation of these standards and the looming economic crisis that's going to happen. Now, what I find very fascinating is he also mentioned Springfield, and while this is an interesting correlation, I wouldn't call it super substantive in nature. I'd certainly just say that it's very, very fascinating to me. This was a note written out, a bulletin from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago from 79 West Monroe Street, put out June the 1st of 1917. And this bulletin discussed the idea of encouraging everyone to buy Liberty loans. And Liberty loans were one of the ways for the government to fleece the middle class and to fleece the wealth from the farmers and the agriculturalists and the industrial-based factory workers of the nation in those days, and to essentially convert that wealth into long-term government bond promises that were never going to come to fruition because they knew what they were going to do with the Great Depression less than 15 years later. But one of the locations for the distribution of this Federal Reserve Bulletin went out in Springfield, Ohio. District 4 Liberty Loan Collection Committee for the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, stationed in Springfield, Ohio, under the management, looks like, of a George W. Winger out of Springfield, Ohio. So this town, while it does represent, of course, the immigration situation that we're seeing on full display in the present day and in the present time, it also has an interesting association back to the Federal Reserve itself. And we know that the Federal Reserve will eventually be left holding the bag when all of these banks are essentially go insolvent because they're in violation of antitrust laws and they have no liquidity left and nowhere to go. So when President Trump tells us you may never see me again, and he says in 2 weeks I'm going to Springfield and I'm going to Aurora, 2 weeks out from the 18th of September is essentially right after the 1st of October. So just a couple of days after these guidelines go into effect. And I think President Trump is telling us that October is going to be literally full of surprises, and it may begin with some sort of buckling in the financial market. That financial market buckling could itself tie back to some sort of Kamala association with the 25th Amendment. That's a little bit speculative, but President Trump has used the phrase Kamala crash on his TruthSocial profile a number of different times just in the last 4 weeks. This is an amazing and incredible time to be alive, and they know it, and they know what's going on and what's going to happen to them, and we know that they know it. That's what I'm trying to say there. And one of the ways that they know what's going to happen to them, and one of the ways they're trying to attempt to derail this process, is by prematurely igniting a conflict in the Middle East that allows for this flashpoint of World War III to drive us off of the rails in this revaluation and redefinition project of worldwide finance, and certainly destruction of tunneling systems all around the planet. We recently saw Hezbollah blown up with two-way pagers, and I found that entire cover story very, very suspect. It was immediately attributed to the Israeli Mossad. fingers began getting pointed in different directions, the Taiwanese deep state pointing to someone else, et cetera, et cetera. And fundamentally, the research sort of dictates to show that this project and this entire infiltration operation, which essentially amounted to an ignition attempt by the NATO Western World intelligence community and the Israeli deep state there in Tel Aviv, was coordinated by the UN. It was coordinated by the U.S. State Department on the ground there in that region or in those regions of the world. And it was affected in some regards with the intelligence community. It's very interesting that the Hungarian company that's been accused of manufacturing these devices has ties to the Hungarian intelligence community. And the intelligence community across the NATO nations, it's worth remembering, has sparsely populated patriots throughout it, but fundamentally it's a very heavily captured and infiltrated operation. Why would they be trying to do that? Well, they're trying to ignite the conflict in the Middle East in a premature time frame that would cause us difficulty in controlling it. That's such a conflict is going to create cascading sequences of events that cannot be taken back. The involvement of Turkey, for example, in the broader war, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the extremely large threat to commercial shipping, which will discourage shipping lanes through the Gulf of Aqaba, and even the potential closure of the Suez Canal. So if they can ignite that situation in those circumstances ahead of us moving the needle forward in other significant ways, then that's a way to quote, stave off the inevitable, end quote, if I can utilize the term. So, when we talk about the overall landscape here, when we talk about what's happening with President Trump, when we talk about when President Trump goes on Greg Gutfeld and starts talking about, some people in the media, they looked much better, their hair looked much better 5 years ago. I forget the individual he was referencing on Gutfeld, but that fundamentally tells us that some individuals are doubles. Our deep state opponent knows that they're in a position that they can't get out of. We've got them literally pinned into a corner on public sentiment. We've got them pinned into a corner on the financial changeover in the world. We've got them pinned into a corner on the military objectives worldwide, and they know the coming events are going to destabilize their hold on the planet forevermore. It is extremely exciting, and I think an enthusiastic time to be alive, as I always say. And I'm going to close off our file today, sort of on that note. When we look at the pathway that is laid before us. And when we appreciate that President Trump has told us that we have a year-long celebration to look forward to, it very much feels like Episode 6, Return of the Jedi in some regards, for those out there that have seen that film and are familiar with the Lucas movies. This enormous celebration and ceremony at the defeat of an epic evil. But it makes a lot of sense that in the shaking of that tree and in the defeat of that epic evil, we're going to see epic resistance. And that's exactly what we have going on. Attempted assassinations, multiple teams being alleged to be out there, the involvement of Hussein Obama likely coming to the fore, which will add a whole new dimension to just how high the deep state resistant component here in the USA actually goes, right? The obfuscation of we the people's rights in increasingly more severe form across all of the NATO Western world. All of this is a sign of desperation because this game is for keeps and they have lost and they know it. Patriots, I hope you've enjoyed the file. I've certainly enjoyed discussing these issues and these topics with each of you. And as we look forward, I hope that you will move ahead with encouragement, vigor, and renewed vitality because you get to participate in the return of this planet to a godly balance. We've never had this opportunity across all of our nations at the same uniform and consistent aligned time ever before. This is it. We win and they lose. I'll be back with each of you again soon. God bless everyone. Thanks. This is SG Anon. Bye-bye.